Let us be completely honest about why you are listening to this right now. You did not come here because you need another soft, motivational speech to make you feel warm and comfortable inside. You are here because you feel a painful gap between what you know you can achieve and what you actually do every single day. You have goals that you genuinely want to reach, yet you find yourself constantly choosing the path of least resistance. You promise yourself that tomorrow will be different. But when tomorrow comes, you repeat the same old patterns. You have likely blamed yourself for this gap more times than you can count. You call it laziness, you call it a lack of discipline, or you call it a profound character flaw. But what if I told you that your self-sabotage is not a moral failure, but a biological function? You are not broken, and you are not weak. You are simply operating on outdated software. Your brain was never designed to make you a millionaire, a high-performance athlete, or a visionary leader. The human brain was designed by millions of years of evolution for one specific purpose: to keep you safe, comfortable, and alive. It is programmed to conserve energy, to avoid uncertainty, and to view any form of discomfort as a life-threatening danger. Every time you try to step out of your comfort zone, your internal alarm system triggers a chemical response to pull you back to safety. That hesitation you feel before doing hard work is not a sign of weakness. It is a survival mechanism working exactly as it should. The problem is that you are no longer living in a primitive environment where saving energy means surviving the winter. You are living in a modern world where following those ancient instincts guarantees that you will remain average, stagnant, and unfulfilled forever. If you listen to your brain's natural impulses, you will always choose the couch over the gym and the phone screen over the book. Your biological default setting is mediocrity, because mediocrity is safe and requires zero effort. This audiobook is not about fighting against your nature with brute force until you burn out. It is an instruction manual for overriding the outdated operating system that is currently running your life. We are going to look at the neuroscience behind why you make bad choices and give you the tools to hijack that process. You will learn how to bypass the emotional centers of your brain and manually engage your logical control center. You need to understand that your feelings are not commands that you must obey. Just because your brain screams at you to stop does not mean you have to listen. We are going to dismantle the biological traps that keep you stuck and replace them with protocols for relentless execution. The days of being a slave to your own biology end right now. Welcome to the manual for your new operating system. Chapter 1. The Biology of Failure. Stop pretending that your problem is laziness. Stop telling yourself that you just need more willpower or more discipline, or that you're somehow fundamentally broken in ways other people aren't. That story you've been telling yourself, the one where you're uniquely flawed, uniquely weak, uniquely unable to follow through, is a comfortable lie that protects your ego while destroying your future. The truth is far simpler and far darker. Your brain was literally designed by evolution to keep you stuck exactly where you are right now. And it's doing an absolutely perfect job of it. Your brain's primary job is not to make you successful, not to help you build an empire, not to push you toward your potential or your dreams or anything that requires genuine effort and risk. Your brain's only job, the only job it has ever had, across millions of years of human evolution, is survival. Keep you alive, conserve energy, avoid unnecessary risk. View anything uncertain as a genuine threat to your existence. And for 3 million years, that programming kept your ancestors from getting eaten by predators and freezing to death in brutal winters. But you're not living in that world anymore. And that same survival programming is now actively sabotaging your future every single day without you even realizing it's happening. Here's what's actually happening inside your skull right now. And this is where understanding becomes the first step toward real change. You've got two systems fighting for control over every major decision you make. And the neuroscience on this is crystal clear and well documented. The first system, your limbic system, is ancient, emotional, and absolutely obsessed with immediate gratification and comfort. It wants pleasure right now, not in 6 months or a year, but in this exact moment. It sees any kind of risk as potential death. It pulls you toward Netflix when you should be working on your business plan. It whispers that you deserve rest when you need to push harder. The second system, your prefrontal cortex, is newer in evolutionary terms, much slower to activate, and designed specifically for long-term thinking and strategic planning. It knows what you actually need to do to build the life you want. It understands the delayed gratification. It can imagine yourself 1 year from now and make decisions based on that future vision. But here's the brutal part that most people never understand until it's too late. Your limbic system is faster, significantly faster. Research on emotional processing shows that the amygdala, the emotional center of your brain, can register and respond to threat information in as little as 20 milliseconds, while your prefrontal cortex needs 30 to 40 milliseconds just to process the same information, and then another 100 or so milliseconds to engage in deliberate thinking. That gap might sound tiny to you, but it's everything. That's the difference between your emotional brain hijacking your decision before your rational brain even knows a choice exists. And that's exactly what's happening to you every single evening, when you sit down intending to work on your business and end up scrolling instead. Let me be specific about this, because the science is unambiguous and well established through decades of research. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux discovered what he calls the low road, a direct neural pathway from your sensory input straight to your amygdala, bypassing your prefrontal cortex entirely. This low road processes emotional information incredibly fast, activating your fight or flight response before your thinking brain even has a chance to evaluate whether the threat is real. Your rational brain, meanwhile, is taking what Ledoux calls the high road, traveling through the thalamus, to the sensory cortex, to the prefrontal cortex, and only then to the amygdala. That circuitous route takes more time, requires more energy, and demands more conscious attention. So when you're tired at 7 p.m. after a full day of decisions, your low road is firing on all cylinders, while your high road is basically offline. The amygdala wins. Your limbic system wins. And you end up on the couch instead of building your future. And here's where it gets truly insidious, because your limbic system didn't just pick one enemy to defeat you with. It brought sophisticated backup, dangerous backup that was literally engineered by teams of neuroscientists who studied addiction and designed technology specifically to hijack your dopamine system and keep you trapped. That device sitting in your pocket right now, that phone, wasn't designed to serve you or help you or make your life better. It was engineered to own your attention, to capture your focus, and to keep you engaged as long as possible. Because your engagement is what generates the revenue that funds the entire enterprise behind that technology. Here's the actual data on how thoroughly this has worked. The average American checks their phone approximately 144 times per day. That's once every 6 to 7 minutes, even during work hours, even during time with family, even in moments when they've explicitly promised themselves they won't. According to recent Gallup research, 58% of Americans now report that they use their phones too much, up from just 39% back in 2015. When surveyed, 74% of adults aged 30 to 49, your demographic, admit they spend too much time on their phones. And perhaps most telling, 44% of adults report experiencing anxiety when they're separated from their phones for more than a few minutes. This isn't willpower failure. This isn't laziness. This is systematic addiction engineered by people who understand your brain better than you understand it yourself. Your brain is still running on dopamine programming from a world of scarcity. When food was hard to find, dopamine made you hunt relentlessly. When mates were scarce, dopamine made you compete for them. When social status was limited and survival critical, dopamine made you climb the hierarchy. That system worked. It kept humans alive for millions of years and drove civilization forward. But now you've got unlimited stimulation, infinite content, endlessly refreshing feeds, slot machines in your pocket designed by engineers who literally studied how gambling addiction works in the brain so they could replicate it with notifications and likes and social validation metrics. Your limbic system doesn't understand that this stimulation is infinite, because for millions of years, stimulation was finite. So it goes absolutely haywire. It thinks it found the best hunting ground in human history, an infinite source of dopamine hits available 24 hours a day, and you're the prey being hunted. But the deeper problem goes beyond your phone. And this is where decision fatigue enters the picture with devastating effect. Research conducted by Roy Baumeister and Kathleen Vose at Florida State University over more than a decade demonstrated that your prefrontal cortex operates like a depletable resource, like a battery that drains with every single decision you make. When you wake up in the morning, that battery is fully charged, but every choice throughout your day drains it a little bit more. What to wear, what to eat for breakfast, how to handle the conflict in that morning meeting, which emails are urgent and which can wait, what to prioritize, what to delegate, what to ignore. By the time you've made 100 decisions, your prefrontal cortex is running at reduced capacity. By the time evening arrives and you've made 300 decisions throughout the entire day, your decision-making capacity is nearly depleted. So when you sit down at 7 p.m., intending to work on your side business or your fitness goals or whatever project represents your bigger vision, you're not working with a fresh, powerful prefrontal cortex. You're working with an exhausted, depleted decision-making system that has already spent all its resources managing the mundane demands of your workday. Your limbic system, meanwhile, has been conserving energy all day, staying quiet, observing, waiting for exactly this moment when your prefrontal cortex is too tired to fight back. And when that moment arrives, which is every single evening, your limbic system makes its move. It wants comfort. It wants stimulation. It wants the path of least resistance. And without a functioning prefrontal cortex to argue back or provide genuine resistance, your limbic system wins the battle without even having to fight. Let me give you a concrete example because this is where theory meets the actual destruction of your real life. There's a man named Robert, 51 years old, runs a regional sales office, makes solid money, has the respect of people who work for him, and by all external measures looks successful. But here's what Robert's evenings actually look like. He sits down intending to build a consulting side business. Every single evening for the past 4 years, this is his intention. 4 years. Not a typo. That's approximately 1,460 evenings of the same pattern unfolding over and over again. He opens his laptop. He tells himself, tonight is different. Within 8 minutes, his brain kicks in with the excuses. I'm too tired. I need to decompress first. I'll have more energy tomorrow. So he closes the laptop. He pours a drink. He turns on the TV. And another evening vanishes into the void, while his prefrontal cortex sits there exhausted and defeated, unable to overpower what his limbic system is demanding. Robert has now spent roughly 1,460 evenings, that's 4 years of evenings, waiting for motivation to strike, and it never does. 4 years. That's 1,700 working hours that could have been spent building a second income stream, learning new skills, or advancing toward a meaningful goal. Robert's brain isn't broken. Robert isn't lazy. Robert's brain is doing exactly what millions of years of evolution designed it to do, protecting him from effort and uncertainty by pulling him relentlessly toward the safe, familiar path. The problem is that Robert, like you, is asking the wrong part of his brain to fight the battle. He's asking his exhausted prefrontal cortex to override his fresh, powerful limbic system's preference for comfort. And when you're already depleted, that's a fight your brain is biologically wired to lose 100% of the time. And here's where your brain becomes a master liar. Because once you lose the fight between your prefrontal cortex and your limbic system, once your phone wins and Netflix wins and comfort wins, your brain doesn't just accept defeat and move on. Instead, it rationalizes. It tells you that you deserved rest because you worked hard that day, that Netflix is a reward you've earned, that checking your phone is just a quick break to clear your mind. It wraps the raw survival instinct in language that sounds reasonable, almost wise and mature. And suddenly your nightly defeat starts to feel like self-care instead of self-sabotage. You believe the story because it feels true. Your brain has convinced you that your failure is actually wisdom. But it's not. It's your brain protecting its own choices by lying to you about why it made them. So now you understand what's actually happening. You understand that this isn't a character problem that you need to fix through more self-discipline or more motivation or through blaming yourself for being weak. You understand that willpower doesn't work because willpower is a prefrontal function, and your prefrontal cortex is already exhausted by evening. You understand that your brain is being actively weaponized against you by technology specifically designed to exploit the dopamine system that evolved to keep your ancestors alive on the African savanna. You understand that understanding this doesn't change anything yet. Awareness alone is useless. Knowledge alone is useless. What matters now is what you do with this information. Because knowing that your brain is wired wrong is only step one. The real question is this: what system will you build to overcome it? Because that's what separates people who actually change from people who know they need to change but never do. The solution isn't fighting harder. The solution isn't trying to use more willpower or more discipline or trying to white-knuckle your way to success. The solution is something completely different from what you've been trying. It's about interrupting the limbic hijack before it even starts. About redesigning your environment so that bad choices become harder than good ones. About building systems and protocols that work with your biology instead of constantly fighting against it. Chapter 2. The Dopamine Trap. Your phone isn't just a communication device. Your phone is an engineered dopamine delivery system designed by teams of neuroscientists and psychologists who spent millions of dollars studying exactly how to make you addicted to checking it. And the worst part? It's working perfectly. You're the experiment. Your attention is the product. And your brain doesn't stand a chance against what's been built. Here's what you need to understand about dopamine, because it's going to completely change how you see your daily behavior. Dopamine isn't actually the pleasure chemical. That's a massive myth that everyone believes because it sounds intuitive. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. Dopamine makes you want things. Dopamine creates craving. Dopamine is what drove your ancestors to hunt for days without food. What made them pursue mates? What pushed them to climb the social hierarchy? Because in a world of genuine scarcity, that dopamine system was absolutely essential to survival. But dopamine didn't evolve for a world of infinite stimulation. It evolved for a world where finding food was hard, where winning social status was rare, where opportunities were genuinely limited. And then someone figured out exactly how to exploit this system by studying one specific thing: variable ratio reinforcement scheduling. This is the same principle that makes slot machines so addictive that casinos have built an entire trillion-dollar industry around it. The basic idea is simple. If you pull a slot machine lever and you always get the same reward, you lose interest pretty quickly. The dopamine system gets bored. But if you pull the lever and you sometimes get nothing, sometimes a small reward, occasionally a big reward, and very rarely a massive jackpot, suddenly your brain can't stop pulling the lever. Your dopamine system goes haywire because it doesn't know what reward is coming next. And that unpredictability creates an almost irresistible urge to keep pulling, keep checking, keep going. B.F. Skinner proved this decades ago through animal experiments and noted that variable ratio reinforcement is the most powerful schedule of reinforcement known to psychology, because it produces the highest rate of responding. And this isn't accidental when it comes to your phone. Every time you check your phone, you don't know what you're going to find. Maybe an important email, maybe something completely useless, maybe something that sparks a dopamine hit, maybe nothing at all. That unpredictability is exactly the same mechanism that makes slot machines so addictive. And it's been deliberately engineered into every notification, every message, every social media app. Your phone vibrates. Your dopamine spikes in anticipation. You check it. Maybe something good, maybe nothing. Your brain doesn't know, so it must check the next time. And the next time. And the next time. Let me give you the actual neuroscience behind why your phone is more addictive than anything else you encounter in your daily life. When you win on a slot machine, or get a like on social media, or see that someone has responded to your message, your brain releases dopamine into the ventral striatum. This reward center deep in your brain that's connected to motivation and compulsive behavior. But here's the part that's truly diabolical. Researchers have discovered that dopamine doesn't actually spike when you win. Dopamine spikes in anticipation of winning, and it spikes even more intensely when you experience a near miss. That near miss, when you almost won on the slot machine, when you thought a message was going to be important but it wasn't, actually creates more dopamine than a successful outcome because your brain interprets it as, I was close, I might win next time. This is why near misses are so much more addictive than actual wins, and why multi-line slot machines with their higher frequency of near wins are so much more addictive than traditional slots. Your phone operates on this exact same principle. You scroll through your feed and you get near misses all day long. You see something that might be interesting but isn't. You check your messages and there's nothing important. You look at notifications, and most of them are garbage. But every once in a while, not predictably, but just often enough, there's something genuinely engaging. So your brain keeps checking, keeps scrolling, keeps pulling that slot machine lever in your pocket because the next swipe might bring the dopamine hit you're waiting for. Here's where this becomes genuinely dangerous to your ability to make good decisions. Research on gambling addiction and internet addiction has revealed something terrifying about what chronic dopamine stimulation does to your brain structure. MRI studies conducted at multiple research institutions have shown that people with internet addiction disorder have measurable decreases in gray matter volume in their prefrontal cortex, specifically in the dorsolateral PFC, which is critical for executive function and self-control. Studies using voxel-based morphometry techniques have found decreased gray matter in the orbitofrontal cortex, supplementary motor area, and anterior cingulate cortex in internet-addicted individuals compared to healthy controls. Translation: the more you use your phone compulsively, the smaller and less functional the decision-making center of your brain becomes. But it gets worse. Research using proton magnetic resonance spectroscopy on internet addiction patients showed that the frontal lobe white matter, the neural pathways that transmit information, undergoes biochemical changes associated with what researchers called partial neuronal loss. The study found decreased N-acetylaspartate ratios and increased choline ratios in addicted subjects' frontal white matter, indicating what researchers interpreted as a neurodegenerative process in that region. In plain language, chronic phone use is literally shrinking the part of your brain responsible for good decision-making. It's atrophying the neural tissue that says no to impulses. It's systematically destroying the prefrontal capacity that's supposed to override your limbic system's demands for instant gratification. And here's the part that explains why you feel so exhausted all the time, even when you haven't actually done anything. Dopamine dysregulation from chronic phone use creates what researchers call reward deficiency. Your brain's baseline dopamine functioning gets blunted from the constant artificial stimulation. That means normal activities, exercise, conversation, reading, building something, stop triggering dopamine the way they should. You need more stimulation to feel the same dopamine effect. The slot machine gets less exciting, so you gamble more. Your phone becomes less rewarding, so you check it more often. You need bigger and bigger stimulation hits just to feel normal, because your brain has adapted to the constant artificial dopamine bombardment. You're not actually enjoying anything anymore. You're just chasing the absence of withdrawal symptoms. There's a specific term for this. It's called dark flow, and it's a trance-like state where people become completely absorbed in their addictive behavior for hours at a time. Slot machine addicts describe this state. Gaming addicts describe this state, but so do people who spend 8 hours a day scrolling through their phones without consciously deciding to do so. They look up and 4 hours have passed, and they have no memory of what they even saw. That's not laziness. That's your brain being systematically hijacked by technology designed to exploit your dopamine pathways. So now, let's connect this back to Robert from the previous chapter. The man who spent 4 years trying to build his consulting business, but ending up on the couch instead. Robert doesn't have a discipline problem. Robert has a dopamine problem. His prefrontal cortex is already depleted from a day of decisions. His dopamine system is being artificially stimulated 144 times per day by phone notifications. His neural pathways for executive function have been demonstrably shrunk by chronic phone use, and his brain's baseline dopamine functioning is blunted. Meaning normal activities, building a business, which is genuinely difficult, can't compete with the artificially amplified dopamine hits from his phone. Robert's brain is literally telling him, you could work on something difficult and uncertain that requires sustained focus and real effort. Or you could check your phone and get a dopamine hit every 6 minutes on a variable ratio schedule that makes slot machines look boring. That's not a fair fight. Robert's biology has been hacked, and he has no idea it's happening. But here's where the manipulation gets even more sophisticated. Because your dopamine system isn't just being hijacked by notifications and likes. It's being hijacked by the structure of how information is presented. Social media platforms use what psychologists call infinite scroll. The interface automatically loads more content as you reach the bottom, so there's literally no stopping point. In a casino, eventually you run out of money. On your phone, there's always more content. Always another item to check, always another reason to keep scrolling. This creates what researchers describe as endless seeking behavior. Your brain gets stuck in a loop of perpetual seeking that has no natural endpoint. And the response is always the same. I'll just have more willpower. I'll use my phone less. I'll set a timer. I'll put it in another room. But you already know how that works out. Willpower is a prefrontal function, and your prefrontal cortex is already compromised. It's depleted from decision fatigue. It's atrophied from chronic phone use. Its dopamine functioning is blunted from artificial stimulation. You're asking an already defeated system to win a fight against an opponent that's been specifically engineered by the smartest engineers on the planet to win. Willpower never stood a chance. The cruelest part of this entire system is that it's not an accident. This isn't technology that evolved naturally. This is technology that was deliberately designed by people who understood neuroscience and deliberately chose to exploit it. Former tech executives have admitted this. Tristan Harris, a former Google design ethicist, describes how tech companies employ the same persuasion tactics that casinos use. The same variable ratio reinforcement, the same near-miss psychology, the same endless streams of content designed to never let you reach a natural stopping point. These aren't bugs. These are features. They're intentionally built in. So what does this mean for your ability to make good decisions? It means that every time you check your phone, you're literally weakening the neural infrastructure for decision-making. Every notification you respond to, every like you chase, every scroll-through of your feed is simultaneously rewarding your dopamine system while simultaneously atrophying the prefrontal cortex that's supposed to be in control. You're training your brain to be worse at making good decisions while training it to crave dopamine hits. It's a double attack on your ability to override impulses and choose what actually matters. And the most insidious part? Your brain rationalizes all of it. It tells you that you need to check your email in case something important comes through. It tells you that staying connected is part of your professional responsibility. It tells you that you're just taking a quick break. It tells you that you deserve the relaxation. It wraps the dopamine addiction in a code of logic, and suddenly your compulsive phone checking feels like a reasonable choice, instead of an engineered hijacking of your entire reward system. Chapter 3. The comfort zone is a kill zone. Your comfort zone isn't actually comfortable. It's a prison disguised as safety, and your amygdala is the warden. Your brain treats any form of change, any form of uncertainty, any form of stepping outside what's familiar as an existential threat. Not like, this might be uncomfortable. Like, this might kill me. And your amygdala responds to that perceived threat the same way your ancestors' amygdalas responded to a predator, with absolute survival shutdown. Here's what neuroscience has revealed about how your brain processes uncertainty versus certainty. Researchers conducted a comprehensive meta-analysis of fMRI studies examining brain activation patterns across multiple types of uncertainty. Threat uncertainty, reward uncertainty, decision-making under uncertainty, and learning under uncertainty. The findings were unambiguous. Your brain becomes significantly more active under conditions of uncertainty than under conditions of certainty. Your neural circuits light up like a Christmas tree when faced with an unknown outcome, and that activation pattern triggers your threat response system. Your amygdala is basically screaming "danger unknown" and flooding your system with stress hormones. This is the evolutionary logic. In a world of predators and survival threats, uncertainty is dangerous. An unfamiliar sound in the savannah could be a lion. An unexplored path could lead to a cliff. An unknown food source could be poisonous. So your amygdala evolved to treat uncertainty as a threat to be avoided at all costs. But now you're using that same system to make decisions about building a business, starting an exercise routine, or pursuing a career change. And your amygdala responds the same way it responded to predators, with pure avoidance. Stay in the known. Stay in the familiar. Stay safe. Because safety is survival in amygdala logic. This is why comfort zones exist. They're not created by weakness or laziness. They're created by your brain's legitimate survival mechanism, treating the unknown as legitimately dangerous. Your comfort zone is everything your amygdala has already labeled as safe. The job you've had for 5 years. The relationship that's familiar, even if it's unsatisfying. The routine that feels predictable. Your brain has categorized all of these things as not a threat. So the amygdala gives you permission to stay there. Everything outside that zone gets labeled as potential threat. And your threat response activates automatically, flooding your system with cortisol and adrenaline. But here's where the trap gets really dangerous. Your brain isn't content with just feeling uncomfortable. Your brain wants to justify staying in your comfort zone by creating a narrative that makes sense. And this is where rationalization becomes your saboteur. Rationalization is a defense mechanism identified decades ago by Freud and later expanded through cognitive dissonance theory. When you're facing a conflict between what you know you should do and what you're actually doing, your brain experiences discomfort, what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. To reduce that discomfort, your brain manufactures seemingly logical explanations for why staying small is actually the smart choice. You tell yourself, "I'm not ready yet. I need to learn more. I need to wait for the right moment. The timing isn't perfect. I should be more certain before I take this risk." People my age don't usually make this kind of change. This is just not who I am. These aren't conscious lies you're telling yourself. These are narratives your brain has constructed to bridge the gap between "I want to do something bigger" and "I'm terrified of the uncertainty." Your brain literally distorts your perception of reality to make the fear-based decision feel reasonable and wise. And the research on this is clear. Rationalization happens largely outside your conscious awareness. You don't sit down and think, "Now I will construct a false narrative to justify my fear." Instead, your brain just does it automatically. Studies on cognitive dissonance show that after people make a choice that conflicts with their self-image, they unconsciously shift their beliefs to justify that choice. Not because they're stupid, but because your brain prioritizes internal consistency over external reality. If you see yourself as smart and successful, but you're staying in a situation that's keeping you small, that creates dissonance. So your brain rewrites the narrative. You're not staying small, you're being prudent. You're not avoiding risk, you're being responsible. You're not stuck, you're being strategic. The cruelest part of this system is that the rationalizations actually sound logical when you're in the amygdala's grip. Your brain presents these excuses with such confidence, such apparent wisdom, that you believe them. They feel true because they're being generated by your own thinking mind, in partnership with your emotional brain. You're not lying to yourself. You're defending yourself. You're protecting your self-esteem from the shame of admitting that fear is running your life. And that defense mechanism is so effective that you can spend years, even decades, inside your comfort zone, while genuinely believing you're making wise choices. But let's get specific about what happens neurologically when you're faced with stepping outside that comfort zone. Research on the amygdala's response to threat shows that the amygdala doesn't distinguish between different types of uncertainty. Physical threat, social rejection, professional failure, embarrassment. They all activate the same neural circuitry. Your amygdala responds to the possibility of a business failing with the same intensity it would respond to a predator attack, because from your amygdala's perspective, both represent a threat to your survival status. In a social species like humans, social survival is tied to physical survival. If you're rejected from the group, you're more likely to die. So embarrassment, shame, and fear of judgment activate the same threat response as physical danger. This is why stepping outside your comfort zone feels like facing actual death. Your amygdala isn't being dramatic. It's being consistent with millions of years of evolution that linked social status directly to survival. When you contemplate leaving your job to start a business, your amygdala detects the uncertainty and the potential for failure and social judgment. And it treats that uncertainty the same way it would treat a physical threat. It floods your system with cortisol. It elevates your heart rate. It triggers the vagus nerve response. You feel genuine fear, not imagined fear, but real neurological fear. And your conscious mind interprets that fear as evidence that the decision is dangerous. I'm scared, therefore it must be a threat. Therefore I should not do it. But here's what your conscious mind doesn't understand. You're supposed to feel fear when stepping into uncertainty. That's not evidence that you shouldn't do it. That's evidence that you're growing. That's evidence that you're challenging your amygdala's definition of safe. The problem is that your brain has taught you to interpret amygdala activation as a stop signal instead of a learning signal. Every time you feel scared, your brain screams danger, and you retreat back to your comfort zone. And then your prefrontal cortex says, I could see how that would be scary, so maybe I'm not ready. And another rationalization gets added to the pile. Here's a specific example from research on goal pursuit. Psychologists have documented what they call avoidant coping, the tendency to delay, procrastinate, or avoid situations that provoke anxiety, which actually strengthens the association between that situation and fear. The more you avoid something that scares you, the scarier it becomes. Your amygdala learned an association. Starting a business equals threat. Therefore, I should avoid it. And every time you avoid it, you're reinforcing that association to your nervous system. You're teaching your brain that avoidance is the right response. Psychologists call this anxiety strengthening. The more you run from the fear, the more real the threat feels. The rationalization system keeps this cycle spinning because it allows you to avoid without admitting you're avoiding out of fear. You don't say, I'm afraid of failure. You say, I'm being prudent. You don't say, I'm terrified of judgment. You say, I don't think I'm ready. And because these rationalizations sound reasonable and wise, you keep making them, and your comfort zone gets smaller and smaller and more claustrophobic, while the outside world gets scarier and scarier. And here's where this connects to the previous chapters. Your depleted prefrontal cortex can't fight this battle. By evening, your PFC is too exhausted to override the amygdala's threat response. Your dopamine system is blunted from phone addiction. So the idea of pushing yourself into uncertainty doesn't trigger dopamine reward signals. It just triggers amygdala threat signals. So you stay in your comfort zone. You rationalize it as wisdom. And Robert continues to not build his business, and Sarah continues to not go to the gym. And millions of people continue to live lives that are smaller than their potential because they're following amygdala logic that evolved for a world that no longer exists. The question isn't whether you're capable of stepping outside your comfort zone. The question is whether you're willing to feel the amygdala activation and do it anyway. Because that's what stepping outside the comfort zone actually feels like. It feels like danger. It feels like threat. It feels like you might fail and die. Metaphorically speaking, though your amygdala doesn't distinguish metaphorically from literally. And most people interpret that feeling as evidence they shouldn't do it. They mistake amygdala activation for legitimate danger. But here's what changes when you understand the mechanism. You can stop trusting your feelings as truth. You can start seeing amygdala activation as information. interesting information about where your brain thinks the boundaries of safety are, rather than as a command to obey. Amygdala activation doesn't mean something is dangerous. It means your amygdala perceives uncertainty. And every time you step into that uncertainty anyway, every time you do it despite the fear signal, you're teaching your amygdala new information. You're saying, this situation that I thought was a threat, it didn't kill me. I survived it. I can probably do it again. Chapter 4. Override the system. Everything you've learned so far about limbic hijacks, about dopamine traps, about amygdala threat responses, about rationalization and comfort zones. It's all interesting as background knowledge. But now we're going to do something infinitely more valuable. We're going to build you a protocol that actually works because it works with your biology instead of against it. This is where theory becomes practical. This is where understanding becomes power. This is where you finally stop losing to your own brain and start winning. The fundamental principle behind everything that follows is this. You cannot outthink a limbic hijack once it's already happened. You cannot willpower your way through amygdala activation when your prefrontal cortex is depleted. You cannot logic your way past dopamine craving when your neural pathways have been rewired by compulsive phone use. But you can interrupt the hijack before it happens. You can catch the decision in that tiny window between stimulus and response before your limbic system takes control. And that window is almost unbelievably small, but it's exploitable. Neuroscience has revealed something critical about conscious decision-making that changes everything about how you approach this problem. When researchers have examined the timing of conscious awareness of decisions, they've found that conscious intention to act typically emerges around 350 to 450 milliseconds before you physically move, but the brain's preparation for that action begins approximately 800 milliseconds before conscious awareness. Think about what that means. Your brain has already decided what it's going to do 800 milliseconds before you consciously realize a decision is being made. The conscious awareness of your choice shows up late to the party, well after the decision has already been initiated at an unconscious level. But here's where the exploit lives. There's a critical window of approximately 250 to 500 milliseconds between the stimulus hitting your senses and the limbic hijack becoming fully operational. In that microsecond space, your prefrontal cortex still has the capacity to engage. If you can interrupt the automatic response pattern before it completes, if you can introduce a deliberate action that breaks the chain, you can redirect the entire decision. This is what researchers call a pattern interrupt. And it's the foundation of every single successful protocol for overriding automatic behavior. The most famous modern version of this is the 5-second rule, developed by Mel Robbins. And the science behind it is solid, even if the mechanism is counterintuitive. When you have the urge to act on a goal, when you feel the impulse to start your workout, to make that call, to work on your business, you count backward from 5 to 1 out loud. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then you move. You don't think. You don't prepare. You don't wait for courage. You just move. The mechanism is elegantly simple in how it works. When you begin that backward countdown, you're engaging your prefrontal cortex, the deliberate thinking center, in a focused task. The counting demands your attention. It requires your conscious mind to focus on something specific and external, rather than on the fear and excuses generated by your limbic system. By the time you reach 0, those 5 seconds have done something neurologically critical. They've shifted your brain from emotional response mode into executive function mode. Your prefrontal cortex is now active. Your consciousness is engaged. And most importantly, you've interrupted the automatic cascade of, "I'm scared, therefore I shouldn't do this," that would normally follow the impulse. Here's why hesitation is the death of action. Every second you hesitate, your limbic system gets stronger. Every second you delay, your amygdala has more time to process the threat and pump more cortisol and adrenaline into your system. Every second you think about the fear, you reinforce the neural pathway between the stimulus and the threat response. Psychologists have documented this extensively. The longer you delay taking an action that triggers fear, the scarier that action becomes. Delay strengthens fear. Action weakens it. But most people have it completely backward. They believe that waiting until they feel ready, until the fear subsides, will make the action easier. But neuroscience shows the exact opposite. Waiting makes it harder because the longer you wait, the more real the threat becomes in your brain's assessment. The 5-second rule exploits this by forcing action before the limbic hijack is complete. You're not waiting for courage. You're not waiting for certainty. You're not waiting for the fear to go away. You're moving before fear fully consolidates in your nervous system. And once you move, once your body begins the action, something remarkable happens. The amygdala receives feedback that the threat wasn't real. Your body didn't die. You didn't fail catastrophically. The social judgment didn't destroy you. And that feedback begins to recalibrate your threat assessment system. But the 5-second rule is just the starting ritual. It's the initial interruption. What you need next is a deeper protocol for making decisions that actually matter. Decisions that require more than just raw courage. Decisions where you need to think strategically about what you're choosing. This is where we introduce what we'll call the Stop Cadre Protocol, a 5-step system designed to move you from reactive limbic decision-making to deliberate prefrontal decision-making. STOP stands for the initial pause. When you feel the impulse to act, or when you feel the impulse to avoid acting, you physically stop whatever automatic response is trying to happen. You break the pattern. You interrupt the cascade. This is your 5-second countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Move your body. Change your physical state. The point is to engage your prefrontal cortex and shift out of limbic response mode. C stands for clarity. Once you've interrupted the automatic response, you ask yourself a single clarifying question. What do I actually want here? Not what are you afraid of? Not what feels comfortable? Not what the easiest path is? What do you actually want? This question forces your prefrontal cortex to engage with goals rather than fears. It redirects your attention toward your actual values and intentions rather than limbic avoidance. The clarity step typically takes 10 to 15 seconds. You're not overthinking. You're just clearly stating to yourself what you're trying to accomplish. A stands for awareness. After you've clarified what you want, the next step is to become aware of what your limbic system is telling you. Not to fight it, not to override it, just to notice it and name it. I'm feeling scared of judgment. I'm anticipating failure. I'm sensing uncertainty. By becoming aware of the limbic signal without judgment, you create space between the emotion and your response to it. This is metacognition, thinking about your thinking. And research shows that metacognition dramatically reduces the emotional impact of those signals. When you can observe the fear rather than being consumed by it, the fear loses power. D stands for decision. This is where you consciously choose your action based on your values, not based on what your limbic system is demanding. This is the deliberate choice made by your prefrontal cortex. You've interrupted the automatic response. You've clarified your goals. You're aware of the limbic signals. Now you decide what you're actually going to do. This decision is critical because it's the point where you start training your brain that you are in control, not your limbic system. R stands for response. Once you've made the deliberate decision, you execute it immediately. And here's where the 5-second rule comes back in. You don't hesitate. You don't reconsider. You don't wait for the feeling to be right. You move. Because hesitation is when the limbic system regains ground. Movement is when your prefrontal cortex consolidates its authority. E stands for evaluation. After you've taken the action, you pause and evaluate what happened. Did the feared outcome actually occur? Did the world end? Did you die? Of course not. You're still alive. You're still okay. This evaluation is critical feedback for your amygdala because it's updating your threat assessment. You survived the uncertainty. You survived the discomfort. And the next time you face a similar situation, your amygdala won't perceive it as quite as much of a threat because you've provided evidence that the threat wasn't real. This entire stop cadre sequence typically takes 30 to 60 seconds. That's it. In less than a minute, you've moved from automatic limbic reaction to deliberate prefrontal decision to executed action to updated threat assessment. And because you've done it, because you've provided your nervous system with evidence that the threat wasn't real, the next time the situation arises, it will be slightly less scary. Do this consistently. Do it daily. And you begin to systematically retrain your amygdala about what's actually threatening and what isn't. But there's another critical element to overriding the system. And it's something that most motivational approaches completely miss. You need to understand that your decision-making is only half about your conscious choice. The other half is about your environment. James Clear, in his research on habit formation, noted that 40% of our daily actions are driven by habits, by automatic patterns laid down by repetition and context, not by conscious decision-making. Your environment is constantly triggering these patterns. The presence of your phone triggers the scrolling habit. The couch in front of the TV triggers the evening entertainment routine. The proximity to unhealthy food triggers the eating habit. This is why just deciding to make better choices fails so dramatically. You're asking your already depleted prefrontal cortex to make the right choice every single time you're faced with a trigger. But you haven't changed the triggers. You're playing a losing game because you're trying to use willpower against environmental design. And here's the truth that actually works. An environment that makes good choices automatic will always beat an environment that requires willpower for every decision. Think about it differently. If your phone is sitting on your desk right next to your workspace, how many times throughout the day will you be tempted to check it? Hundreds. How many times will your prefrontal cortex need to say no? Hundreds. But if your phone is in a different room, if it's not in your visual field, if it requires actual effort to access it, how many times does your limbic system even try? Dramatically fewer. You've shifted from fighting a limbic impulse hundreds of times per day to fighting it 0 times because the trigger was removed. This is the real power move in overriding your automatic systems. Stop relying on willpower and start designing your environment so that good choices are the path of least resistance. Move your phone out of your workspace. Put your gym clothes where you see them first thing in the morning. Remove junk food from your kitchen and stock healthy snacks instead. Delete the apps that hijack your dopamine. Unfollow the social media accounts that trigger comparison and inadequacy. You're not using willpower. You're using design. You're redesigning the landscape so that the good choice is the easy choice. Here's a specific example of how powerful this is. Robert, the man from earlier who spent 4 years failing to build his consulting business, finally made a change, not by using more willpower, but by changing his environment. He moved his laptop to a separate desk in a different room from the TV. He disabled notifications on his phone. He put his phone in a drawer during his designated work hour. He created a physical separation between the triggers for his comfort habits and his work area. Did he suddenly become a superhuman with infinite willpower? No. His biology didn't change. But his environment did. And when the environment changed, his behavior changed automatically. Within 3 months, he had completed the foundational course outline for his consulting business. Something he hadn't been able to accomplish in 4 years of trying to willpower his way through it. The combination of these protocols, the stop cadre sequence for acute decision moments, plus environmental design that makes good choices automatic, is what actually overrides your limbic hijacks. Not because you're becoming a stronger person, not because you're developing more discipline, but because you've fundamentally changed the equation. You've made the prefrontal choice the easy choice. You've changed the triggers in your environment. You've provided your amygdala with repeated evidence that stepping outside your comfort zone doesn't kill you. And here's the part that ties everything together. Once you've started making these deliberate prefrontal choices consistently, something remarkable happens to your neural pathways. Every time you make a choice that aligns with your values, you're strengthening the neural connections in your prefrontal cortex. Every time you take an action despite fear, you're weakening the association between that stimulus and threat in your amygdala. Every time you choose something difficult over something comfortable, you're training your brain to see difficulty as survivable, not as death. You're literally rewiring your brain through repeated, deliberate choice. But this rewiring requires consistency. It requires you to use the protocol not once or twice, but regularly, daily, until the new pathways become stronger than the old ones. This isn't about perfection. Missing once is a mistake. Missing twice is the start of a new pattern. But if you miss once and then get back on track, you're still building the right neural pathway. The key is consistent return to the protocol, not consistent perfection in execution. Chapter 5. Environmental Design. Here's the uncomfortable truth that most self-help gurus will never tell you because it undermines the entire premise of their industry. Willpower is not your problem. Discipline is not your problem. You don't need to become a stronger person. What you actually need is to stop relying on willpower and start using design. Because willpower fails predictably, dramatically, and universally when you're tired. But design works every single time, regardless of how tired you are, regardless of how depleted your prefrontal cortex is, regardless of how badly your amygdala wants comfort. Think about it from a purely practical perspective. If willpower actually worked, why would people who successfully lose weight and keep it off do something completely different from people who fail? Research has shown that successful dieters don't use more willpower than failed dieters. They use less. How? By removing the need for willpower in the first place. They don't keep tempting food in their house. They don't go to restaurants where they've habitually overeaten. They don't spend time in environments where their triggers are present. They've removed the friction between themselves and their goals by removing the friction that temptation creates. This is what behavioral economists call choice architecture. The design of how choices are presented to you. Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein popularized this concept through their research on nudges, which are small environmental changes that guide behavior without restricting freedom. But here's the key insight that most people miss. You don't have to wait for a government or organization to design your environment. You can design it yourself. And when you do, you stop playing the willpower game and start playing the design game. And the design game is unwinnable for your limbic system. The most powerful research on this comes from studies examining what economists call pre-commitment devices. Researchers at Columbia University conducted a fascinating study where they measured how much money people would actually pay to remove temptation from their environment. They offered dieters the ability to pay a fee to have tempting food removed from their choice set during a decision task. On average, people were willing to pay approximately 15% of their monetary endowment, roughly $1.50 to $3 per person, just to not have to see a tempting food and exercise willpower against it. Think about what that means. People literally valued the removal of temptation at nearly $5 per hour. They recognized that the presence of temptation imposed a cognitive cost on them, a measurable burden on their executive function. And they were willing to pay to eliminate that burden rather than rely on their willpower to resist. But here's the part that's truly critical to understand. When stress levels increased in the study, people's willingness to pay for temptation removal increased dramatically. Under conditions of acute stress, people were willing to pay nearly double, up to $3.38, to have temptation removed. Why? Because stress depletes prefrontal cortex resources even faster than normal. Under stress, willpower is even weaker, so the solution becomes even more obvious. Design the environment so that the temptation doesn't exist in the first place. This principle extends far beyond diet and food. It applies to every arena where you're currently relying on willpower. Your phone is a temptation that's designed to remove willpower from the equation. Notifications are engineered interruptions that hijack your dopamine system. Social media is built on choice architecture that makes endless scrolling the path of least resistance. Email is a constant stream of decisions that deplete your prefrontal resources. Yet most people try to use willpower to resist all of this. They tell themselves, "I'll just check my phone less," or "I'll only scroll for 5 minutes," or "I'll turn off notifications but keep my phone nearby in case something important comes through." They're asking their depleted prefrontal cortex to win a battle against technology engineered by teams of neuroscientists who studied how to exploit that prefrontal cortex's weakness. Stop trying to win that battle. Stop pretending willpower will save you. Instead, redesign your environment so the battle doesn't exist. Here's how this actually works in practice. A phone sitting on your desk creates a constant low-level threat stimulus for your amygdala. Even if you're not consciously looking at it, your brain registers its presence. Studies have shown that simply having your phone visible, even if it's face down and silent, reduces your cognitive capacity for focus-intensive tasks. Your brain is subconsciously monitoring it, anticipating notifications, maintaining a state of partial vigilance. That's a background drain on your prefrontal resources that you're not even aware of. But if your phone is in another room, if it's completely out of your visual field, that drain disappears. Your prefrontal cortex doesn't have to defend against a threat it's not perceiving. So the design intervention is absurdly simple. Phone goes in a different room during your work blocks. Not on silent, in a different room. You're not using willpower to resist checking it. You're using design to make checking it sufficiently effortful that your limbic system doesn't bother trying. The friction cost of getting up, walking to another room, retrieving the phone, and checking it is high enough that your automatic response system decides it's not worth the effort. Instead of asking your prefrontal cortex to say no hundreds of times per day, you've reduced the number of times your limbic system even tries to hijack you down to near zero. This is what environmental design actually looks like in practice. You're not relying on discipline. You're manipulating friction. You're making good choices the path of least resistance. Research on default options, the choices that are automatically selected unless you actively opt out, shows that defaults are extraordinarily powerful in determining behavior. When countries changed their organ donation systems from opt-in, you have to actively choose to be a donor. To opt out, you're automatically a donor unless you choose not to be. Donation rates increased from approximately 20% to 90% or higher. Same population, same people, same willpower, different default. The difference between a 30% donation rate and a 90% donation rate is not personal discipline. It's choice architecture. You can apply this same principle to every area of your life where you're currently fighting willpower battles. Want to exercise more? Put your gym clothes on your bed or somewhere visible the moment you wake up. Make working out the default path to getting dressed. Want to eat healthier? Don't keep junk food in your house. When you're tired at 7 p.m. and your amygdala is screaming for comfort food, the presence or absence of that food determines your behavior. If it's there, friction is low and temptation wins. If it's not there, friction is infinite, and you eat something healthy by default. Want to read more? Put books on your nightstand and your phone in another room. Make reading the easy option when you're trying to wind down. Want to work on your side business? Set up a dedicated workspace that's physically separate from your entertainment area. Make that space attractive and accessible. When you sit down to work, you're not fighting against your couch and TV in the same room competing for your attention. You've removed that friction. The most powerful application of this principle is what we'll call temptation bundling. Pairing something you're avoiding with something your limbic system actually wants. Research on behavioral economics has shown that when you attach a less rewarding activity to a more rewarding activity, people show dramatically higher engagement with the less rewarding activity. If you hate exercising, do it while listening to a podcast or audiobook that you love. You're not using willpower to make yourself exercise. You're using dopamine from the entertaining audio to hijack your own limbic system in the service of your goal. You're designing your environment so that the difficult activity is paired with the rewarding activity, making the difficult activity more attractive by default. But the deepest principle here is something called friction design. Strategically adding friction to bad choices while removing friction from good choices. Want to reduce phone use? Delete the social media apps from your phone and only access them through a browser on your computer. Add friction. Turn off all notifications. Remove friction that triggers impulse checking. Put your phone charging in another room at night. Add friction to the temptation. Want to save money? Move your savings into a separate account at a different bank that takes 3 business days to transfer from. Add friction to withdrawal. Want to write more? Open your writing document every single morning and leave it open. Remove friction to starting. The innovation here is that you're not trying to become a person with more willpower or more discipline. You're becoming a person who designs their environment so they don't need excessive willpower. And here's what happens when you do this consistently. Your actual capacity for willpower starts to increase. Why? Because every time you don't have to fight your impulses, every time the environment has already made the decision for you, your prefrontal cortex gets to rest and recover. Your decision-making capacity isn't constantly depleted. Every time you make a deliberate choice that aligns with your values because the environment makes it easy, you're strengthening your prefrontal neural pathways. You're training your brain that you are in control. You're giving your amygdala feedback that this behavior is the normal, safe, expected thing. And the compound effect of this is staggering. If you design your environment so that good choices are the path of least resistance, you stop losing the small battles throughout your day. You're not wasting prefrontal resources on 100 small decisions that go against your intentions. Instead, you're preserving those resources for the genuine challenges where willpower actually matters. You're redirecting the energy you were spending on internal conflict toward genuine progress on your goals. This is what happened when Robert finally made real progress on his consulting business. He didn't suddenly develop superhuman discipline. He redesigned his environment. Laptop in a separate room from the television. Phone in a drawer. Notifications disabled. Work hours blocked on his calendar and physical separations between work area and entertainment area. Within 3 months, the person who had spent 4 years failing to build his business had created the foundational course outline. The person who couldn't manage 30 minutes of focused work per evening suddenly had enough capacity to accomplish meaningful projects. Not because he became more disciplined, because his environment made success the path of least resistance. And here's the critical part that ties this back to everything you've learned so far. This environmental design principle works with your limbic system instead of against it. Your limbic system wants to conserve energy. Environmental design makes conservation of energy serve your goals instead of sabotage them. When your good choices are low friction and your bad choices are high friction, your limbic system defaults toward your good choices. You've essentially hacked your own survival instinct. You've taken a system evolved to keep you safe and comfortable and redirected it toward the life you actually want. Chapter 6. The Lonely Road and the Social Cost. You've been designing your environment perfectly. You've removed your phone from your workspace. You've started using the stop cadre protocol. Your decision-making is improving. Your prefrontal cortex is getting stronger. You're starting to make the changes that matter. And then something happens that blindsides most people. Something that doesn't fit neatly into the categories of limbic hijacks, or dopamine addiction, or decision fatigue. Your social environment starts pulling you backward with a force that's nearly irresistible. Because the truth that nobody wants to hear about personal growth is this: the people around you have a vested interest in keeping you exactly where you are. Not consciously, not maliciously, but systemically. And when you start to change, when you start to move upward and outward and away from their orbit, you trigger something in human psychology that's been operating since our ancestors were living in small tribal groups. The crab bucket mentality. The crab bucket is a real metaphor rooted in actual observation. You put a bucket of crabs on the ground with no lid. You might think the crabs would crawl out easily. The exit is right there. But they don't. The moment one crab tries to climb out and escape, the others reach up and pull it back down. Not because they benefit from pulling it down, not because they gain anything, but because its success highlights their failure, triggers comparison anxiety, and activates their threat response. So down the crab comes, and the cycle repeats. Every crab that tries, everyone pulled back. This isn't just a metaphor. This is what's happening in your social circles right now. The moment you start to change, the moment you stop joining the evening drinking sessions, the moment you skip the gossiping coffee breaks, the moment you start pursuing something bigger than your current situation, the people around you will unconsciously begin pulling you back down. They'll call you selfish for prioritizing your goals. They'll accuse you of thinking you're better than them. They'll make jokes about your ambitions. They'll remind you of past failures. They'll tell you that you're not ready yet, that people your age don't usually make this kind of change, that you should be more realistic about your potential. And here's the cruelest part. They'll all have plausible-sounding reasons for why they're doing this. They'll claim they're just being realistic with you, that they're protecting you from disappointment, that they're looking out for your best interests. But underneath, the real mechanism is operating. Social comparison theory, documented by psychologist Leon Festinger over 70 years ago and confirmed in hundreds of subsequent studies. Festinger discovered that humans have an innate drive to evaluate themselves. And when objective measures aren't available, we compare ourselves to others who are similar to us. The problem begins when those comparisons trigger what researchers call upward comparison anxiety, the feeling of inadequacy and resentment that arises when someone similar to you surpasses you in some meaningful way. When your peer, someone you've worked alongside, someone you've shared similar circumstances with, suddenly starts moving upward and outward, it triggers a specific neurological response in the people left behind. Their amygdala detects a threat. The unspoken claim that this person is better, more capable, more worthy than they are. And the nervous system doesn't like that threat. So it activates defense mechanisms. It activates what researcher Mark Tesser called self-evaluation maintenance theory. The tendency to reduce the self-confidence of anyone in your close social circle who achieves success beyond what you've achieved, especially in domains you value. The mechanism is powerful and largely unconscious. The person pulling you down genuinely believes they're helping. They've rationalized their resentment as concern. This effect is even more pronounced when people operate from what researchers call a scarcity mindset. The belief that opportunities, resources, and success are limited, and therefore someone else's gain represents a loss for them personally. Neuroscience research has shown that a scarcity mindset actually alters brain processing. When people believe resources are limited, their amygdala becomes hyperactive. Their threat detection systems become more sensitive, and their capacity for cooperation and supportive behavior decreases. Their brain treats your success as a genuine threat to their survival status within the social group. And here's where the social influence gets truly powerful. Research on conformity. Most famously demonstrated through Solomon Asch's conformity experiments in the 1950s, shows that social pressure is extraordinarily effective at modifying behavior, even when you know the group is wrong. In Asch's studies, participants were asked to identify which of 3 lines matched the length of a reference line, an objectively simple task. But the other participants in the study were actually Confederates instructed to give obviously wrong answers. The real finding: about 75% of participants conformed to the group's incorrect answer at least once, and the overall conformity rate across all trials was 37%. When people were surrounded by unanimous group agreement on an obviously wrong answer, they gave the wrong answer more than 1/3 of the time rather than trust their own correct judgment. The power of that finding extends far beyond line-matching tasks. It explains why your friends will pressure you to join them for another night of drinking when you're trying to change your relationship with alcohol. It explains why your coworkers will try to convince you that starting a side business is too risky when you're trying to build something of your own. It explains why your family will remind you of every time you failed before when you're contemplating a major life change. They're not trying to destroy you. They're responding to a primal social pressure to maintain group conformity, to ensure that nobody rises above the group norm because that rise implies a judgment against those who don't rise. The mechanism gets even more insidious when you recognize that public conformity, the pressure to conform in front of other group members, is significantly stronger than private conformity. When Asch tested whether people would conform to incorrect group answers if they could respond privately, conformity rates plummeted. The vast majority of people will stand by their own judgment when they don't have to defend it publicly. But put them in front of the group, make their response public, expose their choice to potential social judgment, and suddenly the pressure to conform becomes almost irresistible. Your brain interprets public disagreement with the group as a threat to your social standing. And your amygdala takes that threat seriously because for most of human history, being excluded from the group meant death. This is why the people in your life will apply pressure most intensely in public settings. They'll make jokes about your ambitions in front of other people. They'll challenge your goals in social situations where you can't respond effectively without looking defensive or arrogant. They'll use the group to apply pressure because group pressure is more effective than individual pressure. One person can be ignored, but the entire social circle united against you. That's a threat to your nervous system, even if your rational mind knows they're wrong. And here's the final trap. The more successful you become, the more the pressure increases. Not from the people you've left behind, though yes, from them too, but from the people who are still somewhat close to where you are. As you move upward, you enter a new social orbit, and you discover that people in that new orbit also experience comparison anxiety. People at slightly higher levels will see you as a threat because your rise implies that the gap between them and the level below them is smaller than they thought. So the pressure continues from a new direction. The crab bucket extends upward infinitely. But here's what most people don't understand about surviving and thriving through this social gauntlet. You cannot stay in the old social circles and grow beyond them simultaneously. It's neurologically impossible because those social circles are invested in your stagnation. You don't need to hate them or resent them or make a dramatic break with them. But you do need to physically distance yourself from people whose dominant mode is pulling you backward. You need to build new social circles with people who are also moving upward, people who don't feel threatened by your growth but instead are inspired by it. People who have different comparison reference points than your old peer group. This is why successful people almost universally report that their social circle changed dramatically as they changed. Not because they became snobs or abandoned their old friends, but because spending time with people who are dragging you backward is corrosive to your growth. It's like trying to exercise while someone is constantly pulling on your leg. You can do it, but it's exponentially harder and the results are diminished. Remove the resistance and everything becomes easier. The practical implication is uncomfortable but necessary. You need to reduce your exposure to environments where the social pressure is against your growth. You need to spend less time with people whose reference point is your old self. You need to build relationships with people who are pursuing similar growth trajectories, people who understand the discomfort of stepping outside their comfort zones because they're doing it too. You need to become selective about whose opinions you expose yourself to, whose judgments you allow into your mental space, whose comparison anxiety you allow to affect you. This doesn't mean being cruel or dismissive toward people who can't understand your growth. It means being strategic about proximity and exposure. It means limiting the time you spend in environments where crab bucket mentality is the dominant force. It means being very careful about who you confide your goals to. Because every time you share a goal with someone operating from scarcity and comparison anxiety, you're giving them ammunition to pull you backward. They don't mean to, but they will. And here's where this connects back to the stop cadre protocol. When you hear the social pressure, when someone tells you that you're not ready, that people your age don't usually make this kind of change, that you should be realistic, you need to recognize that as a stimulus, not as truth. You need to stop. You need to interrupt the automatic response of accepting their judgment as valid. You need to get clarity on what you actually want, not what they're telling you that you should want. You need to become aware of the social threat signal your amygdala is registering. You need to make a deliberate decision about whether their opinion is relevant to your goals. And you need to respond by continuing forward anyway. Because that's what separates people who change from people who know they need to change, but never do. It's not that they don't get pulled backward. Everyone gets pulled backward. It's that they keep moving forward anyway. They accept the social cost of growth as part of the price of claiming their potential. They recognize that not everyone gets to come with them, and they make peace with that. Chapter 7. The Compound Effect of Decisions. You're standing at a crossroads, and you don't even realize it. You've learned about your limbic system and how it hijacks your decisions. You've discovered the dopamine trap and how technology exploits your reward pathways. You've understood amygdala threat responses and how to interrupt them with the stop cadre protocol. You've redesigned your environment so that good choices are the path of least resistance. You've navigated the social pressures that try to pull you backward. And now you're ready to understand the single most powerful principle that ties all of this together and makes it worth doing. The compound effect of small decisions. Here's the truth that will either devastate you or liberate you depending on how you choose to respond to it. Every single decision you make today is not just affecting today. It's compounding into your future. One small decision compounds into another small decision, which compounds into a habit, which compounds into a character trait, which compounds into a destiny. And the mathematics of this are so stark, so unforgiving, and so powerful that once you truly understand them, you can never go back to believing that your small choices don't matter. Let's start with the mathematics, because they're irrefutable. If you improve yourself by just 1% every single day, the math tells you that you won't be 13% better in a year. You'll be 37 times better. That's not a typo. 37 times. The calculation is straightforward. 1.01 raised to the power of 365 equals 37.78. Starting at a baseline of 100, a 1% daily improvement compounds to a final value of 3,778. Meanwhile, if you decline by just 1% every single day, if you make 1% worse decisions, build 1% less discipline, take 1% fewer steps toward your goals, you end up at 2.71, which is less than 3% of where you started. You've reduced yourself to near obliteration through a series of nearly imperceptible daily declines. This is not abstract theory. This is mathematics. This is how exponential growth works. And your life is currently operating on exponential mathematics, whether you're aware of it or not. Every decision is either moving you toward the 37 times better version of yourself or toward the near obliteration version. There is no neutral. There is no treading water. Every choice compounds. Most people look at this mathematics and think, well, that's motivating. But 1% improvement every single day seems impossibly hard. And here's where the genius of compound growth reveals itself. 1% daily improvement doesn't require you to overhaul your entire life. It doesn't require you to make massive, dramatic changes. It requires you to make one small decision slightly better than you would have made it yesterday. 1% is small enough to be sustainable. 1% is small enough to compound without burnout. 1% is small enough to maintain indefinitely. But most people miss the real power of compounding because they're looking for the breakthrough moment. They're waiting for the day when everything clicks and they suddenly transform into a better person. They don't understand that the breakthrough moment is the compounding. The breakthrough isn't a single decision. The breakthrough is 6 months of 1% better decisions that have quietly accumulated into 37% improvement without you even noticing it was happening. This is what separates people who actually change from people who know they need to change. People who change understand that they don't need to be perfect. They need to be consistent. A 1% improvement that you can sustain for 6 months will outperform a 50% improvement that you maintain for 2 weeks. And here's why. The 50% improvement creates unsustainable pressure on your prefrontal cortex. It triggers amygdala threat responses because it feels like too much change too fast. But a 1% improvement feels manageable. It slides under the radar of your threat detection system. And because it's sustainable, it compounds. Consider what happens with financial investment because the principle is identical. Suppose you invest $500 per month and your investment returns 5% annually. In 5 years, your total contributions are $30,000. But thanks to compound interest and reinvested returns, your account value is approximately $33,000. The difference, $3,000, came from nothing. It came from letting time and compounding do the work. Now extend that to 20 years. Your total contributions are $120,000, but your account value is approximately $220,000. You've literally doubled your money through compounding while only adding $120,000. The gap grows exponentially over time. Now apply that identical mathematics to your decisions. Suppose every day you make one small decision that aligns with your values instead of aligning with your comfort. One small decision that moves you toward your goal instead of toward your couch. For most people, this might look like 30 minutes of focused work on something that matters. 30 minutes of exercise. 30 minutes of learning something related to your goals. One small 30-minute decision per day. 30 minutes is approximately 1.4% of your 24-hour day. 1.4%. By the end of 1 year, those daily 30-minute decisions compound to approximately 182 hours, roughly 4.5 full work weeks, of focused time on your goals that you wouldn't have had otherwise. Spread over a year, that doesn't sound transformational. But here's the power of the compound effect. During those 182 hours of focused work, you're not just accumulating hours. You're building skills. You're making progress on projects. You're creating momentum. And each piece of progress compounds with the next piece of progress. Your skills get better, which makes the next 30 minutes of work more productive than the previous 30 minutes. Your momentum builds, which makes you more likely to do tomorrow's 30 minutes than you would have been otherwise. Your prefrontal cortex gets stronger, which makes your decision-making better. You're not just compounding time. You're compounding capability and momentum and psychological confidence. Here's what most people completely miss about the compound effect. The initial improvements are almost invisible. In the first week of 1% daily improvement, you're barely perceptibly different. In the first month, the change is still subtle. You might not even notice. But here's where the mathematics of exponential growth kick in. The gains are almost invisible at first, because you're in the flat part of the exponential curve. But after about 3 months of consistent 1% daily improvement, you've hit the inflection point where the curve starts to bend upward, and suddenly the improvements become noticeable. After 6 months, people start commenting on the change. After a year, people ask you what you did because the transformation is obvious. But by then, you're not doing anything special. You're just continuing the same 1% daily improvement that you've been doing all along. You're continuing to use the stop cadre protocol when you face decisions. You're continuing to maintain your environmental design. You're continuing to limit your exposure to social pressures that pull you backward. You're continuing to make 30 minutes of progress every single day toward your goals. It's not dramatic. It's not revolutionary. It's just consistent compounding. And here's where this becomes genuinely dangerous to people who are trying to pull you backward. Once you understand the compound effect, you understand that their attempts to keep you stagnant are actually costing you exponentially more than just the improvement you'd gain by moving forward. If you decline by 1% every day, you end up at near obliteration. But you're not just declining. You're enabling everyone else around you to decline too. Because your stagnation becomes permission for their stagnation. Your refusal to change becomes the rationalization for their refusal to change. This is why the social cost becomes irrelevant once you truly understand the compound effect. Because the cost of declining 1% every day for 5 years, the cost of staying in your comfort zone, the cost of listening to the people pulling you backward, the cost of giving your limbic system and amygdala complete control over your decisions, is 37 times worse than any social discomfort you'll experience by moving upward and away from people who can't or won't understand. The compound effect is also where small wins start to matter exponentially. Most people dismiss small progress as insignificant. I only worked out once this week. I only saved $50 this month. I only read one chapter of that book. They judge themselves by the magnitude of individual actions instead of by the exponential impact of repeated small actions. But here's what the mathematics show us. Those small wins compound. That one workout compounds into a habit that makes the next workout easier. That $50 compounds with the $50 from last month and the $50 from the month before. And suddenly, you've accumulated $500 in savings through what felt like trivial action. This is where tracking becomes important, not as a form of self-punishment or obsessive monitoring, but as a way to make the compounding visible. When you track your 1% daily improvements, when you actually write down, I did 30 minutes of focused work today, or I made one healthy decision, or I did the stop cadre protocol instead of reacting automatically, you're creating a visual record of compounding. And that visual record does something powerful to your brain. It provides evidence that your effort matters, that your small decisions are accumulating into real progress, that the compound effect is actually working. And here's the final piece that ties this entire chapter together. The compound effect works both ways. Just as your positive decisions compound into exponential progress, your negative decisions compound into exponential decline. The person who scrolls through their phone instead of working on their business compounds that decision. The next day, it's easier to scroll again because they've strengthened that neural pathway. The day after, it's even easier. Within a week, scrolling has become the default, and the business building decision has become harder and harder because you haven't been practicing it. You've been practicing the opposite. And that's compound decline. So the real question isn't whether the compound effect is real. The mathematics prove it's real. The real question is, which direction are you compounding? Are you making 1% better decisions today than you made yesterday? Or are you making 1% worse decisions? Because there is no neutral. There is no maintaining. You're either improving by 1% or declining by 1%. And over the span of 5 years, 10 years, a lifetime, that difference becomes everything. This is why every single protocol you've learned in this audiobook matters. The Stop Cadre protocol isn't just about winning one decision. It's about training your brain that you can interrupt the limbic hijack, which compounds into more confident decision-making tomorrow. Environmental design isn't just about removing temptation from one evening. It's about removing the friction between you and your goals, which compounds into sustainable progress. Managing your social environment isn't just about distancing from one person. It's about surrounding yourself with people whose growth aspirations align with yours, which compounds into mutual elevation and shared momentum. Every single tool compounds. And when you truly understand that, when you truly internalize that 1% better decision today is worth 37 times more than staying stagnant, everything changes about how you approach your days, your choices, and your future. Conclusion. Your new operating system. You've now learned the entire system. You understand how your brain works against you. You understand the dopamine traps that have been engineered into every piece of technology you touch. You understand how to interrupt your limbic hijacks using the stop cadre protocol. You understand how to redesign your environment so that good choices become automatic. You understand how to navigate the social pressures that try to keep you small. And you understand the exponential mathematics of compound growth that make all of this worth doing. But understanding is not doing. And you didn't listen to this audiobook just to understand. You listened because you want to change. So here's what needs to happen right now. Not tomorrow. Not after you listen again. Right now. You need to make a decision about who you are going to be. Because everything that follows flows from this decision. The person you become, the person who makes 1% better decisions every single day, the person who uses environmental design instead of willpower, the person who navigates social pressure with courage. That person is not someone you will become. That person is someone you will decide to be. This is where identity-based habits matter more than any other principle you've learned. Research on habit formation and behavioral change shows something remarkable. People whose habits are connected to their identity show dramatically higher rates of sustained behavior change than people who are motivated by external outcomes alone. If you're trying to exercise because you want to lose 10 pounds, you'll quit when the 10 pounds comes off. But if you're exercising because you are a person who takes care of their body, you'll keep exercising indefinitely because it's not about the outcome. It's about who you are. That is identity-based habit formation. And it's the difference between temporary change and permanent transformation. So the question isn't, am I going to use these tools? The question is, am I the kind of person who uses these tools? The question is, am I a person who makes deliberate prefrontal decisions instead of automatic limbic reactions? The question is, am I a person who designs their environment instead of fighting their impulses with willpower? The question is, am I a person who values their growth enough to distance from people who are pulling me backward? And here's what science tells us about identity. Your identity is not fixed. It's not something you were born with that you're stuck with. Your identity is constantly being rewritten by your actions. Every single decision is a vote for a particular identity. Every time you use the stop cadre protocol, you're voting for the identity of someone in control. Every time you choose environmental design over willpower, you're voting for the identity of someone who is strategic. Every time you continue forward despite social pressure, you're voting for the identity of someone who values their future more than their comfort. And through neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself through repeated action and experience. These repeated votes gradually reshape your neural structure, your neural pathways, your fundamental capacity for decision-making. You're not becoming someone new. You're uncovering who you were always capable of being. The protocols you've learned, the stop cadre system, the environmental design principles, the understanding of how to navigate social pressure, the recognition of compound growth. These are not temporary tools. These are the operating system for your new self. This is how you will think moving forward. This is how you will make decisions. This is how you will build your life. But here's what I need to be clear about. This is not easy. The limbic system will resist. The amygdala will keep triggering threat responses when you step outside your comfort zone. Your old social circles will keep trying to pull you backward. Your phone will keep pulsing with notifications. And there will be days when you miss a commitment, when you fall back into old patterns, when you question whether any of this is worth the effort. Those days are part of the process. Missing once is a mistake. Missing twice is the beginning of a new pattern. But missing and then getting back on track is you voting for your new identity. It's you reminding your brain that despite the difficulty, despite the resistance, despite the social cost, you choose to move forward anyway. This is the choice that separates people who know about these principles from people who live them. Knowing is passive. Living is active. Knowing that decision fatigue is real is different from redesigning your environment to reduce the number of decisions you make. Knowing that your phone is addictive is different from removing it from your workspace. Knowing that you have social pressures pulling you backward is different from having the courage to distance yourself from those pressures and build new connections with people who support your growth. So this is your moment. Not some future moment when the conditions are perfect. Not when you've read this again or listened one more time. Now. Today. Within the next 6 hours, I want you to make one deliberate environmental design choice. Move your phone to another room. Delete one social media app. Put your gym clothes somewhere visible. Create one piece of friction for a bad choice, or remove one piece of friction for a good choice. Just one. Because that one choice, held consistently over the next 365 days, compounds into a life that is 37 times better than the life you're currently living. And then tomorrow, you make another 1% better decision. And the day after that, another. And after 3 months, you'll hit the inflection point where the exponential curve starts bending upward. After 6 months, people will start noticing something different about you. After a year, they'll ask you what happened because the transformation will be obvious. But by then, you won't feel like you did anything special. You'll just be continuing the same 1% daily improvement that you've been doing all along, because by then, it won't feel like effort. It will feel like who you are. This is your new operating system. This is how you override the biological programming that has been keeping you stuck. This is how you claim the version of yourself that you've always known was possible. Not someday. Not when you're ready. Now. Today. With the very next decision you make.